This video is a rewrite for Gotham Knights, a game that underwent a lot of issues in development and had promised to be truly great. When I heard about Gotham Knights, I was so excited that the extended Bat family would get a game focused solely around them. I just love all these characters. So, with the golden age of superhero games we're living in, and coming off the incredible success of the Arkham franchise, I was hyped as hell. Throw in the Court of Owls, and I felt this game couldn't fail. Obviously, I was a bit too starry-eyed. I don't think Gotham Knights is the flaming trash fire it was made out to be, but I do think it's very underwhelming. This video isn't going to be about what's wrong with Gotham Knights. I've actually already made a video highlighting my 3 biggest problems with the game. Instead, I wanted to take a look at the story Gotham Knights tells and rework it into something that I would have enjoyed more, and I think fans also would have enjoyed. If you've seen any of my Arkham rewrites, you should be familiar with my process here, but let me just establish some ground rules before diving in. To caveat this entire video, I am a moron doing this for fun with zero professional experience writing anything. This video is not meant to shit all over the real writers, who I'm sure worked hard on this game. I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into writing a video game than I could ever know, and I'm sure everyone worked their hardest and tried their best to deliver something they were proud of. Personally, I just don't think what we got was very good, but hey, you may not think what I put together in this rewrite is very good either. I'm putting myself out there, and if my last few videos are any indication, you all will have no problem letting me know if any of my ideas are dumb. So, as you're listening, please feel free to comment your own ideas for what you'd do with this story. With that said, I want to establish the one rule for this rewrite that I'm going to try and not break. I'm going to be talking about the changes that I would make to deliver the most satisfying version of events possible, while staying within the parameters established by the original story. By that I mean, I recognize game stories are typically written to accommodate gameplay elements, so I'm not going to write something that forces the addition of some new mechanic. When you picture this rewrite, picture the gameplay you already know. Also, I want to stick with the general beats of the story as established by this game, especially how the game begins, the 4 main characters, and the chief antagonistic forces. This way, the changes I'm presenting would actually be workable within the game we know, rather than act as some what-if fanfiction for a game that has never existed. Hopefully, this feels somewhat on the rails, but please brace yourself for cringe. I think that's everything, so now let's dive into Gotham Knights. To kick things off, I'm going to keep the entire opening with Batman fighting Ra's al Ghul through the explosion of Wayne Manor and the Bat family arriving to discover Bruce is dead, all the same. After this, my version of events will remix the first couple of missions. Firstly, I think in the original version, the timeline for what happens after Bruce's death is a little vague and doesn't quite add up. In my version, the first main mission picks up the night following Bruce's death, after the characters have had time to process the trauma a bit off-screen, and the GCPD has had time to comb through the rubble to find Ra's al Ghul's body. Of course, they just treat him like a John Doe, an unidentifiable guest of Bruce Wayne, killed in an unfortunate accident. But the Bat family knows better. So I think it makes far more sense for the grieving family to go investigate Ra's corpse as soon as possible to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. By starting with this GCPD infiltration mission, the game also establishes the Bat family's escalating conflict with the GCPD right away. To begin the first mission, the player will select which of the 4 characters they want to play in a menu. The other characters not selected will speak to you over their communicators periodically throughout, questioning why Ra's did this, and clearly still struggling with their grief. Also, just for the sake of convenience, throughout this rewrite, I will be referring to the playable character as the Knight in situations where the characters are interchangeable. While investigating, the Knight finds Talia and she burns Ra's body just like in the original game. However, on her way out, she purposely trips an alarm, so the Knight gets found messing around in the GCPD, which further exacerbates tensions. During this strange development, the rest of the team has finally unlocked the files on Batman's last case. You select which character you'd like to play as again, and then go investigate Dr. Kirk Langstrom. This mission remains unchanged from the original game. Discovering his death and returning to the Belfry afterwards, the Knights conclude that he'd been doing some shady research, but otherwise, it's a dead end. Notably, Alfred doesn't show up at this point like he does in the original. Nightwing and Red Hood are central to starting an argument between all 4. With tensions running hot and no cooler head around to prevail, the Knights actually split up. Cut to opening title. One of the big problems I have with how this game begins is that it doesn't do a good job of introducing you to the 4 main characters, nor does it actively encourage the player to try out all their playstyles. To solve this, I'm going to go about the early part of this game a little differently, while still keeping with developments important to the plot from the original. We flash forward 1 week later. Each knight is working on their own. This is an opportunity for the player to get to know each character, both their playstyle as well as their personality. I don't like assuming that everyone and their mother interested in a Bat Family game would be familiar with the last 30 years of Batman lore, so I think it's critical to at least give players a surface level understanding of who these characters are at the start of the game. I also want to say that the following 4 missions I'm about to describe are the only ones in my version of events that require you to play a specific character. These missions also serve as the player's introduction to the open world. These missions aren't in-depth. Essentially, they allow the player to experiment with the traversal while handling a somewhat randomly generated crime around town. Once one crime is solved, their story mission appears on the map. Whenever they decide to complete it, that is when the POV switches to the next character. We open on Tim Drake. He's living with Alfred in a temporary apartment situation since they have nowhere to go after Wayne Manor exploded. Tim is still really struggling with Bruce's death, and he's buried himself with work, trying to crack what was so special about Langstrom's research. He's hitting dead end after dead end, wondering how it could connect to Raish, a villain he personally doesn't have any experience with. He has also developed a serious interest in the Lazarus Pits. Alfred tries to get Tim to leave their apartment, encouraging him to hit the streets as Robin. Tim does so reluctantly, but quickly gets back into the swing of things as he fights some criminals. Over the communicator, he thanks Alfred for pushing him, but is interrupted by Talia al Ghul. Cornered and confused, Tim asks Talia what she's doing, and we get mostly the same cutscene as the original Talia rooftop confrontation. Tim receives all the information about Talia not being associated with the League of Assassins. Yeah, that's right. This ain't no Christopher Nolan movie. She explains their meeting by saying she was looking out for her beloved's youngest bird. Happy he's finally left the nest, she subtly encourages him to keep digging for answers on Batman's last case. Cut to Barbara. There's an optional scene in the original game where Batgirl meets Montoya at Commissioner Gordon's statue. I'm really just repurposing that scene, but with Barbara out of costume. She's here visiting the statue of her father because she feels directionless. She's lost 2 father figures and doesn't know how to move forward. Montoya arrives, they get to talking, and it's here that Barbara realizes she doesn't even remember how her father truly looked. All she remembers is the idealized version of him. After Montoya was driven away by some police chatter on her walkie-talkie, Barbara decides to suit up and get into some action. Of these 4 character-specific missions, this is the only one that's entirely new, but I think it's important to establish the ongoing conflict with the GCPD, which is something that was set up in the original game, but ultimately felt underbaked. Batgirl stops her random crime, but then hones in on a hostage situation involving some freaks and cops. She stealthily takes down the thugs and saves the hostages, but when she goes to speak to Montoya, the rest of the cops open fire on Batgirl, and she has to escape. This is where it's solidified that under Commissioner Kane, the police have strict orders to take down the vigilantes by any means necessary. It didn't take long for both the criminals of Gotham and the police to realize that Batman was gone. His presence was the only thing holding Kane back from this hardline stance on vigilantes due to public opinion of Batman as a hero. The remaining knights don't have the same reputation. Batgirl reflects on missing her father, and then we cut to the next night. We open on a tracking shot of a bedroom floor with some ladies' clothing strewn about. The camera lifts off the floor and over a bed where a young woman lay sleeping contently. Beyond the bed, we catch the quickest glimpse of Dick Grayson slipping into the bathroom. Cut to the inside. He's already half dressed into his Nightwing outfit. Of course, he stops to check out his ass in the mirror, winks at it, and then proceeds to vault out the window of a high-rise apartment. Dick isn't sulking. He's full pedal to the metal, and as he begins his patrol, we get some inner monologue about him not being able to slow down in Bruce's absence. Since Bruce's death, he really hasn't had time to grieve. He's had to keep up appearances being the Wayne heir, including the business responsibilities and the playboy lifestyle that goes along with it. The former doesn't agree with him, while the latter certainly does. But more importantly, he feels he has to keep working at top performance for the sake of the city. He isn't gonna let Bruce down. He isn't going to fail. After his crime-fighting action, he receives a call from Lucius Fox. This Lucius scene essentially plays out the same as in the original. Nightwing confesses that he doesn't understand how Bruce did everything that he did, and Dick's own struggle to live up to that enormous legacy. Lucius reassures Dick personally and professionally with support from Fox Tekka, and as a cherry on top, also provides him with the fast travel glider right away. Finally, we cut to Jason. Alone and sleeping on a rundown couch, Jason is half suited up with his mask off. Empty pizza boxes and beer bottles litter the floor. It's clear that he's operating out of this rundown apartment, complete with a makeshift tech rig tucked in the corner on a folding table. Suddenly, he jolts awake from a nightmare, shouting, "I'm sorry," as his eyes glow green. Yep, we have to do the weird mystic powers thing from this game. I'm sorry, but that's what we're working with. He struggles to come to his senses, but when his retro computer blips red, he immediately gets calm. He slides his mask down, holsters his guns, and gets into the action. After he stops his crime, he's feeling complicated emotions and stops by Arkham. Here, he notices a strange pigeon flying around, which he intercepts, and oddly enough, it appears to have a message for Batman from Harley Quinn. Weird. That night, it's Bruce Wayne's funeral, and we get pretty much the same scene from the very beginning of the original game. Jacob Kane is giving the eulogy, while the rest of the knights are in attendance. After the fact, the four knights regroup at the Belfry, which is pretty run down at this point. Jason called everyone together because he wanted to run the Harley message by them to see if they knew anything. Tim also fills them all in on Talia's presence in the city. There is still some underlying tension between Dick and Jason, but everyone is able to move past that due to the mystery that's unfolding. Nobody is aware of any communication between Harley and Batman, but no one rules it out as a possibility either, and so they decide who's gonna check out what she has to say in Blackgate. It's here that my focus on all four characters converges back to the Gotham Knights we're familiar with, where the choice of which character to use rests with the player. That Harley mission proceeds in the same way the original did, with the Knight breaking in and getting the information she had gathered for Batman, but she escapes. Also, just to cover our bases, we'll add that Harley tells the Knight she was trying to contact Batman for a week by sending pigeons to establish locations they used to communicate. Hence the not-so-random pigeon at Arkham. The Knight returns to the Belfry with the book, and it's here that I need to lob some complaints at the original game. During my first playthrough, I didn't fully appreciate the scope of how little some scenes make sense. The characters tend to talk things over and act like everything adds up, but when you listen to what they're saying, there's little logic there. The perfect example is the original version of this Harley Quinn book decrypting scene. In that version, we're told that this book is the result of Harley doing psychological profiles on criminals in Blackgate. Then Barbara decodes a conspiracy from her mad ramblings, and finally, Tim somehow connects those crimes to the Penguin with the flimsiest justification I've ever heard. He's like everyone else in here, except he served his sentence every time. I'm sorry, what the hell does that even mean? Who on planet Earth is just like the Penguin? He's a very specific guy. I get what they were trying to do with this scene, but it felt very sporadic and messy. It felt like the writers wanted to remind the player of the one character trait they knew about Harley outside of her being crazy: psychiatrist. Then they wanted to give Batgirl and Tim a big moment to show how smart they are too, but it's all just so convoluted. Establishing Penguin's connection to the court with practically no explanation at all really drove me nuts too, and I'm actually stunned how simple a fix exists within established plot points. So here's how I'd rewrite this. Scrap the weird Harley psychiatry pretenses. She has experience working as a covert operative from her time with the Suicide Squad, and Batman wanted to use her because he knew she was best positioned within Blackgate to uncover this conspiracy. What's the conspiracy? The same one from the original. Crimes from across the decades that involve victims who were pinned up by knives, just like Langstrom, and in all these cases, the suspects were let off the hook due to some suspicious activity, like judges or witnesses being killed. Due to her access to Blackgate files, Harley was able to research all the criminals who have ever been there, including Oswald Cobblepot, and she discovered that the first crime he was ever arrested for and served time for, before he was ever even known as the Penguin, was another one of these knife pinup murders. His case is the only one that went through without any incident. He's the sore thumb sticking out of this conspiracy. Boom! The Knights have got themselves a lead. So they go confront Penguin about this, and we find out that he has a chip on his shoulder about the court. As was established in the original game, Constance Cobblepot Penguin's grandmother, is a leading figure in the Court of Owls, but the main game doesn't do anything with this fact. In my rewrite, the reason that Penguin was hung out to dry, unlike everyone else, is because Constance was punishing him. He had no involvement in the court. He knew of it vaguely growing up, but when he started building his own criminal enterprise, Constance had him framed by the court and put away to teach him a lesson. A lesson that never quite stuck, and he's resented her and the court ever since. This explains his connection and grudge, which leads him to assist the Knights, although he is still terrified of the court's power. He guides the Knights to the Powers Club just like in the original, and that entire level plays out exactly the same. Seeing creepy Constance, the execution of the traitor. However, the one thing that I'd change is that the Knights don't find some convenient key at the very end. They still have to escape the death pit and get to the surface, but that's it. It's after this mission, confirming the existence of the court and explicitly tying Batman's last case to that organization, that the Knights decide to operate as a team, and they'll use the Belfry as a shared base. Jason insists that it's only temporary, but we know he'll come around by the end. This is where Alfred also comes into the story proper, to bring some paternal energy into the mix as Big Belfry Daddy. He gets the place in tip-top shape with the help of the Knights, and from this point forward, the Belfry operates as the game hub, and the Gotham Knights we know comes into full form. Now, without that key, things need to change somewhat. In the original, the key was used in order to mumbo-jumbo some science. They isolated some isotope from the key to track down a specific court hideout, which led the Knights to Chelsea Tunnel. Chelsea Tunnel is a surprisingly integral part of this game's story, not just for this level, but also convincing a judge much later on to help the Knights prosecute Jacob Kane. So instead of pulling that out of our asses until we need it, why not utilize that plot point early? The Knights need to start gathering intel from around the city, and the game needs the player to start exploring the open world and getting up to side mission and collectible shenanigans. So now's as good a time as any to start some grinding. Within the original game, stopping criminal activity would grant the player clues, which would eventually trigger story progression when enough had been gathered. So, keeping with that established system, the Knights get to work interrogating the different gangs that operate in Gotham. You need to stop 5 crimes from each gang in order to collect enough clues to proceed. No one knows anything about the court directly, after all, they are a secret organization. However, through your interrogations, the recent murder of a judge's brother comes up, something all the gangs blame the others for, a brutal crime that has increased police activity. The brother was strung up with knives. The Knight looks into this and goes to speak with the judge herself, who at the time is being sieged by court goons, just like the mission that happens later on in the original. The Knight rescues her, and she tells them this all started when she wanted to lift the closure of Chelsea Tunnel. Bingo! The Knight fills the judge in on what's happening, and sets her up in a safe house for what they insist will only be a couple of days, until they can ensure her safety from the court. The Knights then go to the tunnel, except in this version, it's under police protection. Suspicious. Even more suspicious is that when the Knights are sneaking around the police, they overhear them wondering why Commissioner Kane has them on a rotating shift to guard this location. One cop posits that it must be because Kane Industries has some construction equipment on the grounds, and it's a little corruption to protect her hubby's property. So the Knights sneak in, and the level plays out just like in the original. The Knights discover Dionysium, confront the voice, and are faced with talents. Once the Knight escapes and speaks about Dionysium over the communicator, they are interrupted by Talia, who gives them the scoop on Dionysium versus Lazarus Pits and the court's relationship with the League. With all this information, the Knights have a couple of leads to try and tackle. Firstly, the police presence at the tunnel has everyone feeling awfully suspicious of Commissioner Kane, particularly Barbara, who has the largest chip on her shoulder about the woman who replaced her father. This is when Alfred steps up to the plate, volunteering to meet with Jacob to try and get a feel for if he knows anything about the tunnel. Here, the strangely out of place Alfred-Jacob friendship scene from the original game comes into play. However, Alfred also brings up the topic of the tunnel as subtly as possible. He doesn't get anything out of Jacob, and they continue on amicably, but Jacob seems suspicious something is up. After that dead end, we reconvene back at the Belfry. We see that Robin is working diligently to analyze the Dionysium. Dick has the idea to try and match the voices they recorded while in the court space to the attendees of the annual masquerade, where all the rich of Gotham gather. This year, he received an invite since it's in honor of Bruce Wayne. So that mission proceeds like it did in the original, with the Knights sneaking into the Orchard Hotel, where the Jacob Kane reveal as the voice unfolds, but he also reveals that Catherine Kane is fully in on the court. However, only Jacob knows the Knights' true identities, something he hasn't shared out of respect for Bruce. Their plan behind the scenes was always to get a court member to lead the police force. It just makes sense with their mission to control Gotham, and the only thing standing in their way for years was Commissioner Gordon. However, Jacob offers an olive branch to the Knights: ally themselves with the court for the good of Gotham. After all, they have a shared goal of preserving their city, and they could continue fighting the criminal element with the support of the entire police department. The Knight turns down his offer due to the court's methods, and the rest of the level proceeds through the League of Assassins' sneak attack. From here, the Knight immediately goes to confront Talia about whether or not she knew about the attack, and just like in the original, she's fighting some League members in a ruse to prove her innocence, but it's clear she's actually interested in whether or not the court's head has been dealt with. As another little breadcrumb, she also tells them about Langstrom's research into building stronger talons. The Knights reconvene at the Belfry, and this is where the scene when info is laid out on who Ra's al Ghul and the League of Assassins are to Tim comes about, except with some major tweaks. Following the news about Langstrom's research and Tim's own research into the League and now Dionysium, he proposes that they use the life juice to bring Bruce back. He doesn't have confidence that the Knights can handle this on their own, he's panicking, and he misses his father figure. The rest of the Knights and Alfred cannot believe what they're hearing. Jason in particular gets very upset with Tim, which in turn makes Tim embarrassed and angry, lashing out and saying that the pit worked on Jason. He's not a mindless monster anymore, which of course makes Jason guilty of his temper. Tensions cool down when the older Knights explain to Tim who Ra's al Ghul was to Bruce, what his plan was to purge the corruption in cities throughout history, and the horrific damage the Lazarus Pit does to someone. Tim doesn't seem satisfied, but drops the issue for now. With no leads on what's going on, the Knights decide to check in with Penguin to see if he can provide them with any more information on the court. This proceeds just like in the original. They arrive, it's a trap, he apologizes to the Knight, but says it was him or them, and he'll always choose himself. Then, boom! Knight is trapped in the court labyrinth. Wait. Why didn't the court just kill the Knight when they had them knocked out? Creepy? Actually, let's change all that. Rather than the Penguin just knocking them out with gas that somehow doesn't affect him at all, he should point them in the direction of a court hideout, suggesting they may learn more there. Of course, this is a trap, and this is how the Knight gets locked up in the labyrinth. For some sweet exposition, we can even have Constant Cobblepot explain Penguin's motive for the trap while the Knight is trying to escape. Things wrap up just like in the original, with the Knight escaping and talons being released upon Gotham City. Back at the Belfry, everyone is freaking out again. Now, I'm not picking on Tim here, I just think he's the best positioned within the story to cause some group turmoil since he's the youngest and the most emotionally immature. In the original game, this is where the Knights have their one and only real fight where Tim suggests killing Talons, and everyone is like, fuck you. However, in this version of events, logically, it would be Jason who suggests this. Everyone is feeling the pressure from the court and the League. Hell, they just got betrayed and were nearly killed, and now there's zombies loose in the city. Jason naturally falls back into bad habits to feel some sort of comfort and control. Dick and Barbara immediately smack this idea down, but Tim interjects, agreeing with Jason. These aren't living people, they're feral zombies. Everyone said it themselves about bringing Bruce back. They aren't the same as people anymore. When Dick says that's not how Batman would do things, Tim snaps back that Dick isn't Batman. That if he could live up to the cowl, then he'd be a better team leader, and Gotham wouldn't be in the state that it's in. This really affects Dick, and for once, he has nothing to say. Barbara takes over, saying that it's not their position to be judge, jury, and executioner, that they aren't the law. Jason retorts that the law in Gotham is corrupt, that she of all people should recognize that. They're all interrupted when Alfred marches over and shoves a shotgun into Tim's arms. He tells him to feel the weight of it, to imagine aiming it at someone and pulling the trigger. He turns to Jason and asks him if the sight of Robin wielding a shotgun looks right to him, if he's comfortable with Tim following a similar path that Jason struggled to get off of. Everyone is silent for a moment. Tim drops the gun and begins crying. Barbara rushes over to comfort him. Dick remains seated, not knowing what to say. Jason places a hesitant hand upon his shoulder and mutters that Tim didn't mean what he said. Alfred declares that he's fought on many battlefields and that he's killed many men. Too many to remember. He says that Gotham is just like any battlefield he's been on, but Bruce was unlike any soldier he'd ever met. He tells everyone that they are not Bruce, that Bruce never wanted them to be. He wanted them to be themselves. They are free to walk their own paths, using their own methods, but Alfred requests that they honor the legacy that Bruce left behind and operate alongside the system of justice rather than against it. Doing that is hard, Alfred admits. Some of the hardest days Batman ever faced were the early years working alongside Detective Gordon, trying to root out the corruption within the GCPD. But all those years of work paid off. He's confident that the Knights can do the same. This speech from Alfred rallies the Knights, and Dick stands up and lays out their next move. They are going to take what evidence they have on Jacob Kane and send him to prison. It may not topple the court, but removing the voice will weaken them, and they have the evidence they need to tie Jacob to Langstrom's murder. Barbara steps up and says she knows the one detective in Gotham they can trust, who's brave enough to take on the court. Montoya. So yeah, that was the little inter-Knights drama scene that releases some of the pent-up tension that was growing among the family. Things proceed similarly to the original, where the Knights loop Montoya in, except they all don't expose their identities to her for absolutely no reason. They can take her to the Belfry and reveal their plan to take down Jacob. However, Alfred shouldn't be present, and Montoya definitely shouldn't say that she hoped Alfred was Batman and that he just retired. Sorry, you thought Batman was a 70-year-old British gentleman? That line makes this crack detective look like a total moron, and I simply won't have my version of events come near it with a 39.5-foot pole. So all the pieces are in place. They use their judge in hiding to issue a warrant for Jacob's arrest, and Montoya is ready to execute it. The Knights just need to force Jacob out of his Kane Industries fortress. The fortress invasion mission plays out very similarly to the original, with some key changes. If you snoop around Jacob's office for a bit, you can find a message that Jacob leaves for his daughter Kate, aka Batwoman from the comics. This conversation makes it clear that Jacob has an estranged relationship with his daughter that largely focuses around his marriage to his second wife, Catherine. He describes their marriage as largely transactional at first, a marriage of convenience, but he notes that they've become the perfect pair. In the original game, it's ambiguous if Catherine knows about the court. In my version, it's very clear she knows, but it's not like he lays that out to Kate. However, that dialogue would have to change, and instead, Jacob should just describe Catherine as the perfect partner with the same vision for the future. The level continues as usual, with the Knight going through, battling the new Hunter-type Talons in the court's arm race escalation against the League, and then the final confrontation and capture of Jacob. However, before the Knight can cross the finish line by bringing Jacob to Montoya, he is shot and killed by Catherine. The Knight is stunned by this, unsure how to proceed as Catherine begins screaming, rushing over to Jacob and covering her hands in his blood. She starts demanding to know why the Knight did this. Montoya hears the commotion from the lobby and runs over as Catherine puts out a call to the GCPD that the vigilantes have killed her husband and she wants them caught at all costs. After this, Catherine says to the Knight, "Speak not a whispered word of them." Just then, Montoya rounds the corner and Catherine orders her to capture the Knight. When she hesitates, the Knight books it out of the fortress and onto the city streets, where the GCPD is on full alert. The Knight has to run for their life from the police. I'm talking like a full-blown race around the city, with the GCPD throwing everything it has at you. Cops around every corner, cop cars racing after you, everyone is shooting to kill. There's a moment when helicopters begin chasing after you, so the sky isn't even safe. If you've seen Batman Mask of the Phantasm, I'm thinking of a very similar moment to Batman being chased in that movie, the sheer desperation and sense of being overwhelmed and cornered. The player has to evade the police, unsure where to go and what to do. If you can escape their field of view for 1 full minute, then a cutscene will trigger, ending the level, but with a confrontation with Talia al Ghul. After the Knight escapes the police, they grapple up to a rooftop, and this is where Talia picks up where the police left off, surrounding the Knight with her assassins and congratulating them on what she could never do, throwing the Court of Owls and Gotham into disarray all at once. Just like in the original game, she's been manipulating the Knights and was in charge of the League the entire time. Rather than saying this has been her plan for decades, which makes 0 sense, I'll say she's the one who was behind everything leading up to Bruce's death and everything with the Knights since. In the original game, it's never really revealed why Ra's and Bruce were fighting in the beginning. The Knights very briefly talk about it, but it's another case of trying to cover up logical inconsistencies with just more words. They say that Ra's found out about Dionysium and got mad because it's like Lazarus Pits, and because of that, he somehow ended up in a death match with Batman in the Batcave with no court involvement at all. They cover their asses by saying, Ra's was just acting erratic due to the Lazarus Pit exposure, but no, I'm calling bullshit. Ra's was explicitly stated to view Batman as his heir. He just snapped because Batman didn't stop the Court of Owls, who he didn't even know about? Doesn't make a lick of sense. So let's say this. It was because of Talia. The League hasn't been aware of the Court of Owls for decades, just Talia has. She clearly had some relationship with Bruce in this timeline. Dick mentions how Bruce felt when Talia left him. She must have spent a good deal of time in Gotham, and she's a manipulative psycho bitch, so I don't think it's a stretch to assume she was investigating the existence of the court while Batman was busy Batmaning. Hell, she could have used a relationship with Bruce as pretense just to be in the city to actually investigate the court, only leaving him when she was satisfied with what she'd uncovered. So she reveals that she's the one who set Ra's against Bruce, pitting the existence of Dionysium on Batman, framing him for having created it, trying to go around Ra's and betray their fragile stalemate. In his feeling of anger and betrayal, mixed with a tinge of madness and a push from his beloved daughter, Ra's killed Bruce. The only thing left in Talia's plan was beheading the court, something she thought she would have to do herself once Jacob was in custody, but things are even easier now. With the court in chaos and the Knights' public enemy number one, it's time for the League to make their move in Gotham. The Knight is able to defeat the League thugs and escape back to the Belfry, where we get another group meeting. They are now fighting a war on two fronts. The court and the GCPD have essentially merged into one singular adversary, with both under the control of Catherine Kane. It didn't take Talia long to realize this, so now the League, the court, and the GCPD are all battling throughout Gotham. The city is in chaos, and the people blame the Knights. During a televised press conference, Catherine describes the scene of her husband's tragic murder. She even shows security footage from when Jacob egged on the Knights to hit him as proof that they were physically violent with an unarmed elderly man. When there's pushback from the press that the vigilantes don't kill, Catherine states that hasn't always been the case. The vigilante known as Red Hood used to kill years ago. He must be back to his old tricks, and the others have started using his tactics. She says that while she's mourning the loss of her husband, she is more worried for the safety of Gotham from lunatics that have had free reign for far too long, in part due to the terrible judgment of her predecessor. Essentially, the entire city is now turning against the Knights at the same time that Talia is targeting their allies. Things aren't looking good, but rather than falling apart, the Knights rally together and support each other. Jason blames himself, saying he never should have joined up with the rest because of his past sins and out of guilt for damaging their reputation. Dick says that's ridiculous. Everyone here has made mistakes, even Batman made mistakes, and the best thing they can do now is push forward together because they're all they have. Barbara's anger at Catherine Kane grows as her father's reputation is damaged, and she comes to realize what exactly Commissioner Gordon meant to this city, the risks he took in his pursuit of justice, and that it's okay to put him on a pedestal and remember him as an ideal to strive toward. Tim, after hearing Talia's story of Ra's descent into madness and how easy he was to manipulate, comes to terms with the dangers of the Lazarus Pits, never wanting to see his own father figure weakened beyond recognition. The Knights stay strong and come up with their next plan. Just like in the original, there are missions around the city to protect their allies from the League, so that's what they do. They even have to go save Penguin, so we get some nice closure with his character, where of course he finally takes a solid revenge punch to the beak. Once everyone isn't in immediate danger anymore, Alfred informs them that he's noticed something rather odd in the city's power grid. Small amounts of power that have been diverted to Arkham Asylum. So naturally, the Knights go investigate, and unsurprisingly come across Talia's continued experiments using Langstrom's research with Lazarus Pit water, all part of her plan, and they discover and fight a Man-Bat. This is all just like the original game, and so is the following part where they have to stop Man-Bats terrorizing the city, except Each time they confront a Man-Bat, they don't just go to the top of a tower where no one is. Instead, they first intercept the Man-Bat terrorizing some actual civilians. Only after the Man-Bat is interrupted does it take to the skies. This gives the citizens an opportunity to see the Knights in action, defending them against chaos. Then, the fights can proceed up on the towers. Each time this happens, the citizens react more positively to the arrival of the Knights, rebuilding their reputation with the public. Once that's handled, just like in the original, Alfred is able to track down the source of the Man-Bats to a cemetery north of the city. When they go to investigate it, they find 2 squads of police cars battling back Man-Bats. The Knight jumps in to help them, and when the Man-Bats are taken down, the officers are visibly shaken by the experience, and they don't have any urge to antagonize the Knight. Some of the officers even thank them and beg them to keep helping, saying they really miss having Batman around at times like this. The Knight agrees and steps into the Wayne Crypt. Now, this final level proceeds extremely similarly up until the final confrontation. The one thing I'd like to add into the level itself is when the Knights begin seeing the wreckage from the Batcave. While the giant penny and dinosaur were fun to see, I think it would be a really poignant moment for the Knight to see their own costume cases among the wreckage. Anyway, when the Knight reaches the end of the line and finds Talia at the Lazarus Pit, she explains that everything she did was for this moment, to create the ultimate general to lead her army. Bruce emerges from the pit, now malleable to her control, and the fight begins. Now, each Knight is going to have different interactions based on their own story arcs. Jason would be focused on Talia making Bruce into the type of monster he hated himself to be when he was brought back. Dick would focus on Bruce not giving up. He was always taught to never give up, and he hasn't yet, so Bruce can't either. Tim would focus on being torn between wanting to see Bruce back and the realization that he's truly gone, and he doesn't deserve to be brought back, only to lose himself. Barbara would focus on Talia's attempt to corrupt Bruce's sense of justice and reminding Bruce of his ideals. I mean, that's not all the dialogue would be about, there'd be more to it, but I think those beats are important for each of their arcs. Sorry, I'm not going to provide the entire scene for each character, but they should all be different enough to resonate with the specific character in that situation. Anyway, the Knight snaps Bruce's brain back into place, and there's a touching reunion in his brief moment of clarity. He says he's happy to see that they're alright. The next thing he asks about are the others and Alfred. Then, the case. The Knight smiles and tells him they solved it. The Court of Owls was real, and it was right under Batman's nose the whole time. It was Jacob Kane. Now Catherine has taken over. Uncharacteristically, Bruce laughs. Jacob, he asks. He was right in my blind spot. Good detective work. Talia comes out of nowhere, but Bruce steps between her and the Knight, taking a fatal wound with a smile. The Knight screams out, and Talia damns Bruce, asking why he would never listen to her. Talia and the Knight fight, and after the first round, they are interrupted when Catherine rolls up as the new voice of the court. Just like in the original, but it isn't some mystery man under the owl mask. They followed the Knights here for the Lazarus Pit. She expounds that she's worked too hard in the shadows to give up now. She won't let Gotham be destroyed by the League, nor ruined by the Knights. She will control it with an iron fist, through her enactment of her justice. Then, the very last round begins, and it isn't just Talia again, but now with super magic, and the court watching on patiently. Instead, it's the Knight versus Talia and a legion of talons. When the fight is finally over, Batman is in the Batwing, ready to launch one last alpha big dick move to save the day. Talia knows to run and vanishes into the night. Batman says his final goodbyes to the Knight and tells them to run. Meanwhile, the court is just hauling ass toward the Lazarus Pit, unwilling to let their prize slip between their fingers. Instead of some strangely out-of-nowhere condemnation against scary rich people, which, trust me, I agree with, but it just felt very random and preachy, especially coming from a billionaire, Batman's final monologue is directed to Catherine. It's about justice versus authoritarianism. It's about protecting the ones you love, doing everything you can to make sure the people in your life feel safe. It's about knowing when to sacrifice yourself for the greater good, rather than sacrificing the greater good for yourself. He tells her that a great man taught him that, a man who was always better at her job. He says he's not gonna let another demon run around on this earth and threaten Gotham for eternity, and crashes into the Lazarus Pit, detonating the area and bringing the cave crashing down around them. The day is finally saved. The knight you played the final mission as returns to the Belfry, and no one says anything. The characters are essentially muted as they all mourn Bruce's sacrifice and celebrate their bittersweet victory. They embrace each other, they get emotional, all while the news of underground activity rocking Gotham plays on the TV in the background. Cut to 1 week later. Through exposition, we learn that court and league activity has all but stopped in Gotham. The Knights theorize that Talia must have left when she realized there was nothing in the city for her anymore, but they know she'll return one day. The court has gone underground completely, or what remains of them. Catherine Kane has been missing since that day. The public never learned the truth about her, but in her absence, an interim commissioner has been appointed, Renee Montoya. Due to increasingly positive public sentiment and Montoya's leadership, the people of Gotham and the GCPD have begun to appreciate the vigilantes more. Gotham isn't perfect, Gotham isn't even close, but that's why the Knights exist. Everyone stands in the Belfry together, and Dick begins talking about how their teamwork was nice while it lasted, but it's time for everyone to go back to working alone. He walks up to Jason and hands him a cardboard box, saying that he knows Jason was the most eager to go back to working solo, so he took the liberty of packing away most of his stuff already. Jason looks at the box, unsure how to say what he wants to. He tells them that actually, this whole team family thing wasn't as bad as he thought. He wouldn't mind if they all kept... He stops talking. After opening the box, he finds that it's filled just with rocks. Dick laughs and tells him he wouldn't let him leave even if he actually wanted to. Jason feigns anger, and Tim questions how long it took Dick to collect all those rocks. Alfred chuckles to himself. Barbara calls everyone over to listen to a press conference Montoya is giving. There, she reveals the existence of the Court of Owls to Gotham, and her mission to fight back against corruption, just like her mentor, Jim Gordon, taught her. She goes on to say that Gotham City has always needed symbols to fight back against injustice. Gordon proudly worked alongside a Dark Knight when the city was at its worst, and now she too plans to work alongside Gotham's new Knights. Dramatic pose in the Belfry of the family all together, cut to black. Little bit of credits, then uh-oh, what's this? A post-credits scene? Catherine Kane is holed up in a sterilized white compound. She steps out of the shower and clears the steam off a mirror. Her eyes glow green. Just then, there's a banging at the door. Catherine grabs a gun off the counter and walks over. "Who's there?" she asks. "It's Kate," a voice says. "How did you find me?" There's no answer. Just a momentary pause. Then the door blows off the hinges. Through smoke, Kate Kane emerges in black and red tactical gear. "They killed my father. I'm gonna kill them." Roll credits, baby! And there you have it, folks. That's how I'd rewrite Gotham Knights. Two of the core problems I felt were lacking in the original game was a sense of character development from the cast, and then the complete sidelining of Catherine Kane's position as commissioner. Other than during the final monologue, where she's just shown on the phone, she completely disappears from the game after Jacob's death. It's not like she's some major character with deep lore, but this game created an opportunity to do something unique with her that I felt was squandered. But pulling back even further, I really think the bones of this game's story aren't bad. I feel like with just a little more finessing, maybe another draft or two, they could have gotten it to a place that fans really would have appreciated. It may not have looked anything like my version, but I really did try to stick to the original as a jumping off point to show what we could have gotten with a few tweaks here or there. What'd you think? I know I glossed over a ton of smaller details like specific dialogue, but I hope I was able to get at the heart of what those scenes would communicate to the player. So please, let me know what you thought was dumb, what you thought was tubular, and what you changed to make Gotham Knights a more enjoyable experience. If you watched this far, that's just crazy, and I want to say thank you. I really appreciate you giving me some of your time. Well, take care!